Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I recently learned, according to App Annie, fewer than 3,000 apps are making big money each year from paid downloads, in-app purchases and subscriptions. The reality has given rise to a whole ecosystem of mobile marketing tools to help app publishers focus on growing an audience, but not creating a sustainable business. Now, today's guest is Dan Burkaw, who founded Nami, because the marketing tools built for mobile industry's growth era don't really help app developers who are trying to succeed in a subscription era. Now, Dan has founded companies on the forefront of profound technology waves, open source software, the smartphone and cloud computing, and he describes himself as the first serial entrepreneur, a repeat startup founder and CEO. And his startups have built all-powered, world-renowned products used by millions of people around the world. Trust me when I say he has had an amazing and inspiring career in tech, which included writing code that ended up in a submarine when he was 17. And he also has a cracking Apple keynote that you just have to hear. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Denver so we can speak with Dan about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Dan Burkaw. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm working now on my fourth company called Nami. And, I've had a career really dealing in some of the big industry changes. I got my start early in life around the world of open source and sort of Linux, built some interesting technology there that ended up getting used on the U.S. Navy submarines. And, later I spent a little bit of time at Apple and then saw the iPhone launch, built two companies around mobile. One was an agency, one of the first, and became a kind of prominent agency in the mobile app space. From there, built a push notification company that fortunately was able to exit. So my co-founder and I and our team ended up at Oracle, where we built a big component of the Oracle Marketing Cloud that related to mobile marketing. And so I've kind of ridden these different trends in industry. So open source and kind of the internet, really, mobile and cloud services and kind of SaaS. And so what we're focused on now at Nami is related to all those things. On the one hand, mobile and kind of the app economy, so to speak, is more than a decade old now. It's a real business where it's, in the early days, it was some of the early adopter brands were just still trying to figure out, well, do they even need to build an app? Those questions are long gone, and now it's a serious business for a lot of companies. And so because of that seriousness, there's been a lot of shift in part from Apple and Google kind of encouraging this, a move toward a subscription-based model. That started in SaaS, and really you could just say it started with things like daily newspapers, but from a software perspective, SaaS, and then now that's becoming more prominent with consumer experiences, especially ones on mobile devices. But there's a problem, and the problem is that there's a lot of these, and so consumers have a degree of subscription fatigue. There's actually another problem too that the brands care about, or the companies, which is that they have these subscription products, which everybody from a company perspective likes because it's recurring revenue, but they are continuously fighting this thing called churn. But in a way, we see subscription fatigue and churn is actually a different side to the same coin. And what's the solution? And this is what we're trying to solve at Nami, is the solution is if you've got happy subscribers, then they don't churn. So what we're trying to do is build a platform that it empowers the companies that are delivering these subscription services to make their subscribers as happy as possible. And that's a full gamut of things that we do. to help enable that. But part of it is simple things like if somebody wants to cancel, you should let them cancel as easily as possible, because then there's a high probability that they might come back later. If you make it really difficult for them to cancel, they're almost certainly going to never come back. So that's just one example, one little tiny example of how we're trying to build a suite around the subscriber experience, so that happy subscribers won't earn as much because they're happy.
And I'm looking forward to talking about this so much more with you a little later in the show. But one of the things that I always try and do on this Daily Tech podcast is also find out a little bit more about the very human story and what put you on this path. And before you came on today, I mean, you mentioned it a few moments ago, but I read that you wrote code that ended up in a submarine when you were 17. I mean, what's the story there? It's incredibly cool.
I really buried the lead on that one, didn't I? Just glossed right over it. The story there is that, I was, even before I was 17, I was self-taught in computers. Even, in late elementary school and sort of middle school timeframe, I was teaching myself everything I could. I was just fascinated. The computers at school were starting to get connected online. So you could, log into a BBS or sort of a simple menu-based interface that was text-based. And then I remember when Mosaic, the browser that was kind of the precursor to Netscape, came out, and then we started learning how to do HTML and build simple websites. But I wanted more. I wanted to learn way more. So I figured out somehow the school district offered that people could sign up to get access to the Unix computer. And that was very exciting to me. But then I logged into the Unix computer, I got access, and it was just this menu system, and I wanted more. So I reached out to the system administrator and I said, is there any way I can get like the shell, the prompt? I want to get right to the command line interface. And so I taught myself shell scripting. And then from there, I found out that there was this thing called Linux, where I could put a Unix-like operating system on my computer at home. And so I did all that, and I learned all about how to not just install and deploy Linux, but some of the fundamentals of programming. But where that led was that as a young person, I was acting as basically a system administrator. I was, I got linked up somehow to people that were designing those early websites. And the problem with the early websites is they needed somewhere to host. Nowadays, you buy a domain name and you get the hosting, along with it. But in those days, it was you would design it and then you needed to find somewhere to host it. And there was people that were hosting on Windows NT. There was little internet providers that were starting to offer dial-up services that would do a little bit of hosting. And so I was trying to apply my skills of knowing Unix and Linux to manage Apache web servers to host some of these early websites. And in that journey, I got linked up to a web designer that I helped do this for. And but he had one really important rule for me, which was first of all, he wanted to host on the Macintosh. And I had to explain to him that the Mac wasn't an adequate environment to be hosting websites on at that period of time. This was before Mac OS X, which is Unix based. So the classic Mac OS just was not an internet connected OS. It wasn't adequate for hosting any meaningful traffic from websites on the internet. He didn't want Windows NT. So I said, well, what about this Linux thing? He's like, well, that sounds great, except can we run Linux on the Mac? And I said, well, I don't think so, but let me go research. Come to find out, there's this project called MK Linux that was research out of Apple. And next thing you know, we had Linux running on the Mac, hosting some of these early websites that he designed. So he starts talking to people at Apple about this, and they get really excited because Steve had come back to the company and was starting to simplify the product line and start to paint the picture for the future. But Mac OS X was years away. Apple had shrunk and was 90 days away from basically going out of business. And so people at Apple were very excited that there might be a way to sell more boxes by leveraging this Linux on the Mac thing to sell into a whole different audience, not just the desktop publishers that had kind of stayed stuck with Apple, or the educators that had stuck with Apple, but now this whole internet world. So what that turned into is we founded a company that commercialized that open source project, and was a company putting our name behind it. And then we built a bunch of tools over the years on top of that. So what did it lead to? By the time I was 17, it led to we were selling Macs with Linux with then our custom software on top of that into many different U.S. government agencies, from NASA to the U.S. Air Force to the U.S. Navy through one of their partners, Lockheed Martin, a big defense contractor. And so what happened was what they wanted to do at that period of time was find anywhere in the world off-the-shelf hardware. So hardware they could just go buy, without it being custom, or it wasn't cray supercomputer stuff. It's just off-the-shelf hardware that could run a Unix-based operating system to run their very, very sensitive code. And in this case, around sonar. So what happened was we ended up deploying about a dozen Macs onto every U.S. Navy submarine that was running our version of Linux and our software that was running these sonar algorithms, but we had nothing to do with that part of it, which is a good thing. But so our code, what it had to do, so what I did at a young age was, if one of these machines in the cluster of 12 had a problem, well, the boat is out at sea. The whole cluster had to be able to kind of self-heal. So one machine had to be able to come out of the grid, and the remaining 11 had to be able to kind of just keep going and not care that 12th machine was missing or was getting repaired. And so we had to write a bunch of code around making that happen, because when you're out at sea, you don't have necessarily access to extra hardware or extra machines to swap in and out if something went wrong.
And you mentioned a few moments ago you're around Apple as well when the iPhone was released, and we have had John Scully and Guy Kawasaki on this podcast as well. But I'm curious, do you have any good Apple or Steve Jobs stories from your time there?
Yeah, I mean, I have some stories from my time there.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting stories, though, is actually before I joined Apple. Maybe not most interesting. Maybe one of the most nerve-wracking. And it was at that same company. So we were doing Linux on the Mac. Apple kind of was okay with what we were doing, but as Mac OS X got closer and closer to shipping, their need for us sort of started to go away, because once Mac OS was going to ship, that was a modern Unix-like operating system that they could sell into these government agencies, and they didn't need this bizarre operating system replacing Mac OS to do this. So we had exhibited at one of the Macworld conferences, and we did that every summer in New York. One year we went, and we were a little company selling open source. So what that meant was we weren't printing money, and trade show booths are very expensive. So we had this little 5x5 booth that cost thousands of dollars, and then our team is going there, a handful of folks, that's costing lots of money. And the problem is that we've kind of had spent all the money that was possible to even just get there. And then what they want to do, the trade shows, is they want to charge you more for the carpet and for the vacuum to clean the carpet and all this stuff. Well, we're trying to showcase a piece of software that's built around the internet. We needed an internet connection. Well, we saw that on the rate card for the conference, and it was going to be multiple thousands of dollars just to have internet in our booth. And so it just wasn't feasible. Now, back at our home office, we had grown out of kind of the fastest internet we could find at that period of time in near our office. And so my co-founder, he discovered a piece of early 802.11 based wireless gear that was commercial grade. And what it allowed us to do was beam a signal across a set of railroad tracks where there was an internet provider that was willing to put the receiver on their end, plug it in, and essentially that was how we were getting the fastest internet we could find for our office. So Kai, my co-founder, had this idea: why don't we take the transceivers to the trade show and see if one of our friends at Apple would plug it in inside the Apple booth where they had lots of internet access to help us get our booth online. Lo and behold, we had a friend that was willing to do that. And in the days leading up to the conference, I think it was like the day before the keynote, this person comes over to our booth and says, "I can't tell you why, but I had to unplug the transceiver." And we're like, "Huh, that's interesting." He's like, "It'll all make sense tomorrow." It's like, okay. So the next day, Apple has the black curtains around their booth, so you have no idea what they're going to announce. We're in the keynote hall, and Steve is introducing a new product that people knew was coming, the consumer portable. And the way they positioned the consumer portable was it was an iMac to go. And that product became the iBook. And he introduced the first iBook at that Macworld. There was one more thing that he introduced at the end of that keynote through that famous segment. And that was that not only was the iBook now shipping, and it was this new consumer portable, the iMac to go, so to speak, but it also could surf the internet wirelessly. And that was where Steve and the team introduced Airport for the first time. And there's this interesting moment during the keynote where he's trying to plug in a URL and the site doesn't load. He's trying to demo wireless internet. And as I've been told the story, at some point during the keynote, somebody had re-plugged in our transceiver, and because it was commercial grade, very powerful gear, it was creating interference with Apple Airport, not only in the keynote hall but in Apple's booth. And so there was some panic behind the scenes. Somebody unplugged the thing they had just plugged back in, and then he goes to put in a second URL, and it all works. So what we later learned was that as they're setting up these iBooks in the hall, in the booth at the Apple booth, they're like flying engineers into town and all sorts of things because they can't get wireless to work in the convention hall, and nobody knows why. And it's because this commercial hardware that we had brought from Loveland, Colorado, was just basically blanketing the radio frequency spectrum and overpowering, their technology, which was intended for consumer use. And so, all we were trying to do was just save a few bucks and get internet access into our booth. And we had no idea that there was going to be these unintended consequences and kind of almost ruin a big part of one of the famous Apple keynotes.
Wow, what a great story. I love that. And for many people, the launch of the iPhone was a huge pivotal moment that changed everything forever. But of course, it wasn't until the year after when the App Store came out. And you've been a part of the app economy from the very beginning. So I'm curious, as someone that's been there from the beginning, how have you seen it change and evolve from 2008 to where we are now?
Yeah, I mean, those of us that were there in the beginning saw the potential, and part of how we saw the potential wasn't just because we were close to Apple, but some of us were, some of the first BlackBerry users, and the BlackBerry was kind of internet connected for your email, but you wanted more. You wanted it to be connected for apps. That was there was just a strong feeling that, man, this thing could do so much more. If it had the right ingredients. So when the iPhone came out, I mean, I knew that, man, this thing is, because it was built on Mac OS X, desktop class frameworks, networking, et cetera, that it was only a matter of time before there was going to be apps and an app economy built around that. I didn't realize they were going to do a curated app store, but I just knew you were going to be able to write apps pretty early on. And so, in that first year, it was just a lot of us early folks, and some of which had been longtime Mac programmers, because to write an iPhone app in those days, the only people that were writing iPhone apps knew this language called Objective-C. And the only people that knew Objective-C were people that were writing Mac OS X software. So there wasn't very many people in that world. So those early folks were just trying to figure out, how do we do this? What are the limitations? How do we publish something to the store? Should we make it free or should it be a paid download? And remember that first generation of phone was edge-based networking. So those early apps were not as internet connected as ones are now. We weren't streaming video. We weren't, we didn't have backend servers in most cases. They were just utilities that were resident on the device, or little games or little things like that. And so that's one of the main things that's changed, is now with the advent of 5G, and then all the iterations from edge to 5G, these things are way more internet connected, which means they're more complex. There's more back-end systems that are in the mix. And that's one dimension of complexity. The other dimension is that it's not just the phone anymore. We have to support tablets and watches and TV, over-the-top TV boxes, and who knows what future form factors are coming that use these same set of technologies. And then there's not just one ecosystem, the Apple ecosystem, there's the Google ecosystem that has all that same proliferation of different form factors and so on. And so in a lot of ways, the technology, like actually writing an app for these things, has gotten simpler. You don't have to know Objective-C anymore. You can use Swift. Oh, you want to do one better? We can do Swift UI. That makes it even easier. So there's lots of ways to now make it. It's way more accessible on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's way more complex through multiple avenues of complexity. And because of that, at least I won't speak exactly for the independent developer, but for the big brands that are spending now millions of dollars a year to build these things, deploy them across these different ecosystems and form factors. I mean, it's multi-million dollars a year development costs just to keep going. And then every year there's a new operating system, so you got to keep investing. So now it's really serious from an investment perspective. And also the revenue is starting to get serious. And part of that is subscriptions, and we can talk later about that. But so in a lot of ways, it's a lot easier to get going, but in a lot of ways, it's just orders of magnitude more complex, because you can't just be on the phone on Apple's ecosystem. You kind of have to be a bunch of places.
And if we were to fast forward to present day, if we look at the recent Apple events, one thing that really stood out for me was it was no longer about the latest devices and one more thing. It was much more about subscriptions. So I've spoken to many startup founders as well over the last few months, and they've said that many startups struggle to get funding if they don't have that reoccurring revenue that we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. So how do you see the subscription economy continuing to evolve and take shape?
Well, let me first start by why I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's good for folks to get recurring revenue so they can keep investing in products. But even more beyond that, it's actually better for consumers. Let me give you a concrete example. So, years ago, if one wanted to learn how to use Photoshop because they have a design knack and they maybe want to learn the design skills, they would have spent hundreds of, or maybe even thousands of dollars to buy in the big box. There was that big box in the Apple stores that was the Adobe, design box. And I remember they had a flavor that was for photo editing, and they had a flavor that was for desktop publishing. And if you wanted both, you were talking about, multiple thousands of dollars of investment. Nowadays, one can subscribe to Adobe Creative Cloud for, far less than $100 a month, closer to like $25 a month. And now you have access to every single piece of software in the suite. So if you're somebody that wants to get into the field of creativity or creative design, your barrier to entry, you didn't have to figure out a way to come up with thousands of dollars just to get going, just to even see if it was for you. Now you can get in for that first month for less than $50 and see if it's for you. So the thing that subscriptions does is it has the opportunity to make products and services far more accessible to people everywhere. And I think that that's just fundamentally a good thing. I think it kind of democratizes, so to speak, access to different things that used to provide a lot of capital and, was require a lot of capital up front. So I think that's fundamentally a good thing. But it's also good for Adobe, right? They get recurring revenue streams. Now, where it breaks down is when a consumer says, well, wait a second, why am I paying for this thing that I don't have a good experience with, or that isn't meeting my set of needs? And so with subscriptions, there's an incredibly high bar, and consumers are continuously going through this analysis to say, of the things I'm subscribing to, does this still meet the need that I have? And is it delivering a good experience? And if the answer is yes, people tend to renew. If the answer is no, they say, well, I'm going to stop paying for this. And brands are really focused on, how do I get people not to churn? How do I get people not to churn? And so then they fight. They do things like make it hard to cancel, like I mentioned earlier, or they're trying to trick people into the annual subscription so that it's going to be a year before, you're canceling. So they try to play these games instead of just saying, wait a second, if we deliver the best possible experience we can deliver, make it really a fantastic, make sure that our users don't have to ever interact with support to cancel, or don't ever have to be misled on price, or get a subscription that is right for them. Maybe they don't need the platinum tier, maybe they're okay with the bronze tier, right? There's different things that a brand can do to make sure that value exchange is both there and there on an ongoing basis. Because if it is, then a consumer will be willing to keep going. But if that breaks down at any one moment, if at any one moment there's a lack of trust between the brand and the subscriber, then not only will they probably cancel, but it's going to be way more difficult to ever get them back than if the experience is just wonderful. And yeah, maybe they cancel because they can't afford it this month, but because you make it easy for them, and you don't treat them like just a swipe of a credit card, they're willing to come back in a few months when they can afford it again. So there's lots of reasons people cancel, but fundamentally it's, what are the things that clear the bar for me as a user, and what are the things that are disrespecting me or otherwise not continuing to provide the value that I expect a recurring transaction to create.
I completely agree with you on everything you said there. And there will be a lot of business leaders or decision makers listening that have spotted this trend too, and they want to leverage it. They want a piece of the pie. But what challenges do subscription apps face? And are there anything new and different they need to be aware of? Or what is the best place for a business to embrace this?
Yeah, there are challenges. One of the challenges is that because a subscription is that ongoing relationship, you have to think about your customer a little bit differently. So as an example, when I was working inside the Oracle Marketing Cloud, building out the mobile channel, a lot of the use cases where people would trigger these email marketing campaigns or these push notification campaigns was around these like moments in time where somebody would do something and you would send an email in response to that. So for example, in a lot of e-commerce or kind of commerce businesses, if somebody puts a product in their shopping cart and then they close their browser, that in the industry is called the abandoned cart, right? And we don't want people to abandon the cart. We want them to complete the transaction. So the marketing system gets that signal that, hey, the person's abandoned the cart. Let's go send them an email that says, please complete your purchase. Maybe we even give them free shipping or give them a discount to complete the transaction. If we succeed, we send a lot of emails to a lot of abandoned carts out there, and we get some percentage of users to close that loop, then we've just made money. And that's a win. Well, the problem with that model doesn't work with a subscription because a subscription has a life cycle. So a user comes into a subscription And there's different stages. So one stage is that they might come in and they might start a free trial. And that free trial might last some number of days. And then at that end of the free trial, they're either going to need to, say, okay, well, now I want the subscription, or it's going to auto renew, or I want to cancel. And then, so let's say they renew. And then they keep renewing until they cancel, or maybe something else happens, like their credit card on file with Apple, let's say, expires. And so they didn't intend to cancel the subscription, but now they're in kind of a grace period state where Apple's trying to notify them to update their credit card information. And the brand doesn't want to shut off access at that stage because the user didn't want to cancel. And so you kind of have to be aware of where your subscribers are in these different journey moments around the subscription, and align kind of all of your content, your marketing, the access that you're granting to them. All that has to be aligned around that journey. So it means that kind of some of the traditional mechanisms that people are used to from kind of a digital marketing perspective aren't quite right. It's more akin to in B2B marketing, there's been this marketing automation where you can kind of nurture leads and do things from a sales perspective. It's closer to that actually as a model than kind of the consumer marketing that we've been doing in the commerce space at the Marketing Cloud. So all that to say, the subscription mindset is different, and how you engineer systems and integrate marketing tools and think about your data layer. And really it's because I think a lot of people just think that when I create a subscription business, all I'm doing is just charging a credit card more than once. And that's just the beginning. That's just kind of a little artifact along the way around the value of it. But that tells only a tiny percent of the story. And if you're not kind of appreciating that subscriber's life cycle, their journey, in all the things that you're doing, then it's not going to be necessarily a very successful effort.
And before you came on the podcast today, I did a little bit of research on yourself and what you do at Nami. And one of the things that stood out as well, you talk a lot about on-device machine learning. And for anyone that's not heard about that, can you just tell me a little bit more about what that means?
For those of you that are using kind of a modern generation of smartphone, like the iPhone 10 plus, kind of beyond the iPhone 10. So now we're at iPhone 12. Some of the kind of higher end Android devices, you're probably used to being able to unlock the device using facial recognition. And when Apple rolled that out originally with the iPhone 10, they did it in a really clever way. And what that was that they used machine learning, computer vision algorithms on the device to look at, kind of create a point cloud of your face and match that against what the model on the device had been trained on, by when you set up the phone, you kind of scan your face a bunch of times. And so that's how it establishes the baseline. And by the way, every day as you unlock, it's improving the model a little bit. So if you grow facial hair, now you're wearing glasses, or now you're wearing a ball cap, it kind of can learn over time that because your features change a little bit from day to day. But what Apple did was they said, let's put the algorithm on the device, because if we do that, number one, it's going to make the experience way faster than if we have to go round trip to a server somewhere and say, hey, is this Neil? Let's unlock Neil's phone. Yep, that's him. Send the signal back to the device. Yeah, go ahead and unlock. That would have created a lot of latency, and they want to deliver a fast experience with that. They wanted it to be faster and more secure than Touch ID, where you use your fingerprint. So if it's going to be faster, then they knew that they couldn't, I'm just, speculating here. I wasn't on the inside, but I think they knew that they couldn't do this from a server side perspective. It had to be running locally. The second aspect, though, is that, Apple's been really focused over the last number of years on end user privacy. And so the idea of having the point cloud of Neil's face up in some Apple server somewhere, and Dan's face, and all the other Apple users everywhere, wasn't a very desirable option if you want to focus on the end user's privacy. So by running it by running the models locally on device machine learning, you can both have a faster experience, but also put the unique model that's trained for Neil's point cloud and Dan's point cloud and so on. That can all just sit on the device, and the training can happen on the device. So the sensitive data about what makes up Dan's face doesn't live on a server somewhere. So how does that relate to our world? One of the things that we saw coming out of the experience of the marketing cloud is that a lot of times with these kind of digital products and digital marketing, email ends up being kind of this crutch of a tool where the user does something that you want to generate an email from. So as a concrete example, in the mobile world or with these apps, maybe the user hasn't been in the app in a week, and you want to remind them that the app is on the phone. And so you either send them an email or send them a push notification just to kind of wake them up that it's still there. And this has become kind of the de facto thing that people do to try to get people back into these experiences. But the problem is it creates a different type of fatigue. Earlier I talked about subscription fatigue. It kind of creates a messaging fatigue, especially with push notification. I mean, email you can kind of ignore, all bulk email that we all get, but with push notification, it's right there on your device, and it's kind of really, can be interruptive. It can really get in the way of the experience, and so people mute them now, or they try to hide them. And there's all sorts of games that consumers play in order to be annoyed less, quite frankly. Yeah. And so what we wanted to do is we're building a platform to help brands be smarter kind of subscription operators. Part of that is, how do you be a smarter subscription marketer? And we wanted to give folks ways to leverage on-device machine learning, not for on-device machine learning's sake, but to say, hey, maybe one of the best moments to market to somebody is while they're actually still in your experience, because then you don't have to send them a bunch of emails after the fact to try to win them back into your experience. So what if we could be smart? And if the algorithm sitting on the device could say, hey, this person, they might actually be a good candidate. Like, let's say it's a free app that has a premium subscription upsell. Oh, you can use on-device machine learning, for example, to detect that somebody might be a likely purchaser for that premium offering. And then and only then should you present the subscription upsell offer to that user, versus what happens in a lot of apps is that, like, every time you launch it, it's just kind of beating you over the head, just like email, beating you over the head, trying to say, well, you got to upsell, you got to get into the subscription. And it does turn consumers off. So that's kind of how there's other ways that we're thinking about on-device machine learning. But for us, we want to try to give our customers tools that are fast, just like Face ID. We want to try to be a good citizen around end user privacy, not just because that's what we want for the experiences that we use on our devices, but it's where the world's going with regulations around the world and so on. I mean, why would we want to architect a system that isn't built for privacy and have to bolt that on later? We wouldn't want to do that. So when we started the company, we said, let's start with privacy first on day one, because it's where the world's going and it's what we want as end users ourselves. And it means you arrive at some different technical solutions than if you would have started out saying, you know what, we're just going to vacuum up all the data we possibly can, knowing that we'll find a way to make that valuable for our customers somehow at some point.
I'm not sure if I'm OCD or not, but whenever I've got a smartphone, a home screen with lots of notifications on there, an app with a number against it, I have to clear them down straight away. I don't know if you're like that at all.
Not anymore. I mean, there's a certain point there's like too much. And so then there's this whole like time commitment just to clear them all. But I do know a lot of people that do that. It's notification, when we started out, when we built the push notification business that ended up at Oracle, our best customers were sports leagues. And what was great about working with the sports leagues is the push notifications that users were getting were about the teams they loved, the players they loved, and about the kind of those magic moments in sports that a fan would want to know about. So we were sending push notifications that users fundamentally wanted. That was great. That felt so good. And then, fast forward, and our technology starts to be used for, offers and promotions and, really a raw marketing or kind of a salesy point. And that's where consumers start to tune out, especially if you don't personalize how you're communicating. If you're just saying, flash sale, come into the app, you're kind of wearing it on your sleeve that this is just about money. Instead of saying, well, wait a second, if we deliver content that the user wants, we tell them about it, they come in and consume that content. Now they're more engaged in our experience, and there's monetization there somehow, be it ads, video ads, be it, direct purchase of a premium subscription, sponsorships. I mean, there's all a number of ways that will then benefit the brand. So that's one of the things about how push has changed. And we just thought, if we're going to embark on this new business that's focused on this area of subscription, people are still going to do email. They're still going to do push, but let's give them some additional tools in their tool belt so that maybe, just maybe, if we do our job, brands maybe could send one fewer push notification or one fewer email that's just going to annoy their users. Because again, we're in service of happy subscribers. That's what we're trying to do. If you've got happy subscribers, they're not going to churn as often.
And if we do have any business leader listening that wants to launch, scale, and optimize their mobile app subscription business, is there any advice or tips that you would offer to get them up and running and ensure that it is a success and without being intrusive, like you were saying a moment ago?
So, certainly our company is trying to help with that. Our company can be found on the web. We're at nami.ml. So Nami is like tsunami. So NAMI.ml. And you can look us up there, reach out to me, and we're happy to kind of walk you through what our platform does and how we think, at the end of the day, not only are we going to help you get to market just way, way faster, because I mentioned that complexity earlier. It can be, a year of work to build the foundational technology. Even if you're using things like Stripe and building on the App Store and doing all this other stuff, it can be a year of work to launch a subscription product because there's just a lot to it. And we can cut that down to, days or weeks, really days kind of for the initial implementation, but, to get fully operational, I mean, we're talking about weeks, not, a year of time. And then now you're in market and you want to take it to the next level and start to figure out, are your subscribers happy? What are your key metrics? How do you kind of take it to the next level? How do you experiment? And iterate on the experience? We provide tools and capabilities around all of that as well. So nami.ml is the best place to find me.
I'll add everything you've given me there into the blog post just so people can find you nice and easily. But I've loved chatting with you today. I love starting from when you were 17, writing that code in the submarine, the Apple story, to where you are now and helping businesses leverage their subscription business. Completely priceless. I'd love to stay in touch with you and maybe get you on later in the year and see how things are going. But more than anything, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to come back, and thanks for talking. It's been great.
Although this is a tech show, it's the human stories of people like Dan that is the reason that I record this podcast every day. I mean, for example, from writing code that ended in a submarine at 17 to that Apple keynote story, I could have listened to stories like that all day long. But now I invite you to share yours. So please email me questions, song choices for our new playlist, pictures to come on the show, whatever it might be. Send me an email, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Now, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. I'm going to dig deep and try and find an equally as compelling story for tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.